All right, welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guests. Mariah Edgington is a retired critical care and emergency nurse, speaker, mindset coach, and author of the just released book, Journey Well, You Are More Than Enough. Congratulations on your book, Mariah.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Catherine Fitzgerald is owner of Catapult Leadership Group. After surviving her own harrowing leadership roles as CEO and mother of 3 boys, she dedicates herself to working with organizational leaders as they navigate the choppy waters of aligning people, performance, and profits. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
And my buddy Jeff Koziak, one of the few people I'm engaged with daily, one that I've actually met in the flesh. He is a peak performance coach, applying his proven process to fast track leaders and managers stuck in a spiral of stress, doubt, and burnout to do more in less time with increased satisfaction. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you,
being
sir.
with us. And let's jump into today's ethical scenario. Imagine this real life situation. You're traveling across the Atlantic with your toddler. The airline you're flying charges 10% of the ticket price to hold the child in your lap. However, that deal is only available for children under 2. Your child is 26 months, just over the limit, for which the airline requires you to buy the child her own seat for 90% of the full ticket price. You know the child will spend virtually the entire trip in your lap regardless. So you see paying for her seat as a waste of money. However, you don't want to lie to the airline. Your travel agent offers the following suggestion. Buy the 10% ticket. Don't offer any information about your child's age. In all probability, the flight attendants will admit your family on the plane without question. If they ask your child's age, answer truthfully. If they tell you there is an age limit, apologize for your error and offer to pay for the seat. Should you take the travel agent's advice? The floor is open.
I've been dying to hear what Mariah and Catherine have to say about this. I'm going to mute myself.
There you go. Well, I guess I will go ahead and go first because I feel like there's so many parts of this. And one of them that I thought of initially was being a mother and understanding a squirmy 26-month-old. I really wonder how much of the time a 26-month-old is going to sit in my lap, much less not want to run up and down the aisle. And so in that regard, my first thought was if it really is just about money or if it's about comfort and knowing that we need to look at all sides of that. So in an ethical thing, yes, I could go ahead and say they're going to be on my lap the whole time, and I may want to go ahead and save that money instead of investing in the child and my own sanity. So I am on the fence on that one, but personally, I would likely go ahead and invest in myself and my 26-month-old and possibly have them in the chair beside me or the seat beside me, along with some of their favorite toys and some comfort things for them, even though it would be much less expensive to do the other.
You would bring the toys on the plane? You're a great mom. That's great.
That's so funny, Mariah. I am squarely in the same court, but mostly because I feel like having that extra space when those seats are so narrow, and I'm assuming that we're talking about either basic or coach, if we were riding first class, then that's a totally different deal. But when you're in a small area anyway, and you have a squirmy child, my personal preference would be to have the other seat, whether they're sitting in it or not. It just gives us room to move. And it's, being the mother of 3 boys, I can tell you that I have flown with all of them, and I've flown with one of them. And, it's a challenge. It's a 3-ring circus when you're in a plane with 3 little boys, let me tell you. But I would say that the extra space also is a buffer for all the stuff they drop and the stuff they throw and the stuff they have all over their hands and all those things. And the person sitting next to me, in terms of that 360-degree ethical, how do we navigate this for the person who paid an equal amount for their seat, and they're going to likely have a 2-year-old in their space. So I would say I would opt for the other ticket and not listen to the travel agent.
Now, what's interesting about what both of you ladies have proposed is you've sort of sidestepped the question a little bit, because the presumption in this case was that you and your child would be more comfortable with one seat, and that the child would not make use of the other seat. So the question was not only about money, it was actually about the practicalities of it. But what you're suggesting is that either way, there is a benefit not only to you, to the child, but also to the other passengers of having that other seat. And that may outweigh any monetary considerations. Jeff, do you have a take?
Yeah, that seems like a great decision for sanity and peace of mind for a flight over the ocean with a toddler. I am a firstborn child, so I tend to be a rule follower a bit. And one of my core values is excellence. And part of that means following the rules. And so there would be a big part of me that says, well, ethically, if my son is over or my daughter is over 24 months, then I need to pay for the full seat. While on the other hand, taking a look at why they have the rule, and if my child is not a large 26-month-old, but a smaller 26-month-old, and if the rule is in place for comfort, for reasonable comfort of the passengers and all of that, then I might be tempted to follow the advice of my travel agent and ask for forgiveness rather than permission, especially if funds are tight.
And that really cuts to the heart of the question here. There's 24 months is a somewhat arbitrary cutoff point. And you may have very large 18-month-olds, and you may have very small 36-month-olds.
Right.
And then you've got temperament to consider, and then the nature of the child. So what we're really asking here is, when the airline sets a policy that's based on an arbitrary cutoff, is it ethical for me to interpret the spirit of the rule according to my perception of how it applies to me and my child?
Yeah, I can see your point here with this because personally, I've struggled with some issues in and around the arbitrary rules. And this has to do with the airline. And it's interesting because they wouldn't back down from some of their policies that affect us all. It's like a blanket statement. And when I don't meet whatever qualifications, for example, we travel internationally frequently, or pre-COVID we did. And I would have people who would stop me and say, well, let me weigh that backpack you got. And then same airline, different gate would just, it's a backpack. It doesn't matter what it weighs. And so when you look at that arbitrary, who said what, and you have to stop and think, because I'm like Jeff, I have these set things and this is what they put in place. It's kind of like the police officer who sees me go through a red light will know it was really yellow. Okay. But that was my interpretation, right? Over that second. And
Right.
I am going to look at things from the rule standpoint. Now, as you said, Rabbi, it's kind of the, are you sure that that was really what they meant in the spirit of it? Did they mean somebody who was too big to sit in your lap? Is that the whole point of it when you know that's going to happen? And if I had a 26-month-old that was only 20 pounds as opposed to 40 pounds. I mean, I don't remember kids' weights anymore, but that's a different story. You're right. And so now I have to stop and I have to think, okay, yeah, that child will be in my lap and it's an overnight flight and they're going to be sleeping on my lap. And chances are the airline's going to have several seats that are open anyway. And then maybe I might take the advice of the seasoned travel agent who knows that this is something that's normal.
I think what you said earlier, Yonason, about, do I have the luxury and freedom to be able to interpret the laws and rules that are put upon me by, in this case, the airline? And I mean, and is that ethical when an airline is servicing millions and millions of people and they have to draw a line somewhere, and I just got to be lucky enough to end right up, come up on the cusp of that. Yeah, I would say from an ethical perspective, if I were to put my needs aside and look at the larger picture, I would I would have to disregard the travel agent and look at the what does Spock say? Look for the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or my 26-month-old on my pocketbook.
I think that's really true. As you talked about the arbitrary rule of age, I was thinking out loud, in my, like, why isn't it a poundage thing? It's a poundage thing on suitcases. Why are they not using, but I agree with the idea that, it depends on your situation financially too. I mean, there can be a situation where to travel at all is a hardship. And, who knows what the reason for the trip is and why we're taking a 2-year-old on a trip, given the circumstances. It could be a death. It could be all kinds of different things. And so I think asking for forgiveness instead of permission in those situations, as long as you're willing to, pony up the additional cost, is certainly, a way to go if money is the main driver in conserving it. I think for me, the real ethical rub is the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. And it really depends largely on who you run into in the airport, as you pointed out, Mariah. I mean, you could have somebody who is a letter of the law person, and you're going to get to that gate and you're going to pay the extra money no matter what, because they're over a certain age. But at the same time, you could end up with someone who's totally seen you struggling with your children at the gate and realize, I'm just gonna I'm not gonna put one more brick in front of this mother and these kids. So it just depends.
You made a
in the
really interesting
moment.
point there, Catherine, that, I hadn't even thought about that, but it is something we do need to think about, that there is always a context.
Mhm.
And I frequently cite this expression that I really don't like, situational ethics,
Mhm.
which is used to mean that ethics change depending on the situations, which is, I believe, is absolutely not true. I believe that
Correct.
ethical
I'm
principles
with you.
are absolute, but situations do change. And that's why there's no app for being ethical. That's why we have to grapple with the gray, because once you introduce all kinds of different variables, then the ethical equation changes. And if I'm traveling to visit a sick relative, that's different from traveling to go on a trip to Hawaii. and if it is a financial burden, that is something. And you know, anyway, we've all had exchanges with people who are overly officious. My wife was at the airport once, and she with one of our kids going off to seminary, and they had a duffel bag. And you know, a duffel bag, you can measure lots of different ways because it's not square.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman measured it, and it came out above, you know, too big. So my wife, who can be very creative when under pressure, went over to TSA, explained the situation, and said, "Do you have any duct tape?" And her plan was to tightly, and they said, "Well, why do you need duct tape?" And she explained the situation. She said, "I've got a better idea." They wrapped it in shrink wrap.
I love it.
And they put the TSA tag on it so it wouldn't have to be opened up in security. So sometimes with a little creativity, we can get around these situations without being dishonest.
Exactly. I worked in the insurance business for several years in my early career, and my boss always used to say to me, "Catherine, there's no right way to do a wrong thing." And I really believe that to be true. But I also know in the stress of travel with children, toddlers in particular, and then you add a layer of family stress on top of it, you know, I like to give people grace, as I like to say, you know.
It's nice to look for ways when you can accommodate people, even if the letter of the law might be rigid, to find, as you say, to give people grace, to find a way to make it work when the cost is minimal.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about that from the perspective of the airline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be nice. It's hopeful. Although we probably all experience the antithesis of that.
Yeah, a little bit of both for sure.
Yeah.
Mariah, you have something to add?
I wonder if anyone had considered calling the airline. I know that's that big corporate thing, and you never really talk to necessarily a real person. You're going to get you think in your mind you're already going to get the runaround or whatever. But I wonder how they would respond if we did just go to saying, "I'm a very ethical person. I'm very letter of the law. I believe in what you put out here. However, this is the situation. There's been a death in my family. It's extreme hardship for me. If I have to pay for another seat and this child is going to sleep in my lap across the ocean." Is there any percentage of doing that? Would they agree?
You know, I like the fact that you raised that, and it is a topic that I've addressed at times. That isn't that really the responsibility of management to train and empower their employees to be human and
Yes.
to give them a certain amount of latitude. I'm sure you all remember, I talked about this in my ethics keynote, the doctor who was dragged off the United flight because they were, it was like 3 or 4 years ago. They had overbooked the flight, and they offered up to $800 for someone to take a later flight, but nobody wanted the deal. So the computer chose a passenger at random. Security came on and told this doctor he had to get off the plane. And he said, "I have a surgery I have to do. I'm not getting off this plane." They dragged him off the plane. It was videoed. It was the biggest scandal of the year. There was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and United's stock value plummeted $1 billion. So what happened? The gate agent was only empowered to offer up to $800. She didn't have the authority to offer more than that. So who's at fault? It's not her fault. It's the fault of her supervisors, who didn't give her the sense that they would back her up if she needed to make an executive decision, because it was the airline's mistake.
Right.
And so when we don't, if we as leaders or we as bosses or managers, when we don't prepare our people to be able to deal with customers on a human level, then it's really our fault.
Well, to what Mariah was talking about, asking permission versus asking for forgiveness after the fact. I don't know about all of you, but I sometimes asking permission ahead of time, my brain starts running through, oh, well, I could get a no, or I could draw a spotlight to me, and then that could cause other issues. And so keeping your head down and just seeing what can happen can be a lot more tempting and seem easier, and in this case, cheaper. But to engage the situation and ask, like what you were talking about, can often bring a whole bunch of extra stuff we weren't even expecting.
That's true. I traveled to the UK in September, actually last day of August. And the night before the trip, my son and I were just I was on hold for hours with British Airways and Virgin Atlantic, trying to figure out what COVID test was required when we hit the ground in UK within a certain number of hours and how it would be done. And I had purchased what I thought was okay, given, the letter of the law. And yet at the 11th hour, I was concerned that it wasn't right. And so I was trying to get an answer. And every person at the airline said, you need to look at the National Health, NHS authority on the UK government's website. So here I am digging through all these websites, and of course nothing, it says this about the antibody test and this about the PCR test. And I was just in a frenzy. And so at the last minute, I just said, okay, I'm just buying these tests and I'm hoping that it's all going to be okay. And when we got there, it was really a non-issue. The airline didn't care. They just wanted you on the plane. They wanted you to pay your ticket, but I was like, it was the most stressful trip I've ever taken in my life, trying to figure it all out and do it right. Because I'm like you, I'm an oldest born, Jeff, and I have to do it right. Follow the rules.
Yay, us.
But it's a gray area, but nobody at the airline would stick their neck out. They just said, oh, we follow what the UK government endorses. So, read the fine print on the government website. Nobody would take responsibility. So that, again, I think is a training thing.
Yeah. And I feel sorry for those people because they have to try to keep track of all these different regulations and rules for different countries and different airports. And I'm sure they feel overwhelmed as well.
Yes.
So it's understandable that they are reluctant to commit themselves when they don't feel on sure footing. But on the other hand, it's not really right for them to dump it on you because you're probably the least
qualified to make that decision.
Exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had visions of being, in the gate on the exit of the airplane and having them go, oh, sorry, you got to get back on. You can't come into the country. I mean,
that's not stress inducing at all.
Yeah.
And there actually were stories like that during the height of COVID. People actually did have to get back on planes, and that's not only inconvenient but extremely expensive.
Exactly. And add children to the mix, I can't even imagine. Thankfully, mine are grown.
Yeah. One of the things we really didn't get into is the scenario as we presented it is one in which you don't actually lie, but it's sort of a crime of omission. You don't present all the information. And on the one hand, you might say, well, that's better because it's not an outright lie. But on the other hand, you might say that in some way it's more insidious. And I told you at the beginning that this was a real life situation. And it was actually a friend of mine who had this happen to him. And he went to his rabbi and he asked, this is what the travel agent said. And what should I do? And the rabbi knew of a previous case where a similar thing had happened, and it had been taken to one of the leading rabbis of the generation. And he went through a whole discussion and he said, you're not prohibited from doing it, but don't do it. He said, it's not worth it to condition yourself to be manipulative, to be deceitful, even where it's permitted. When we look to cut ethical corners, we actually do harm to ourselves. And it's better for us as human beings to maintain a stricter sense of ethical conduct, not just because we're rule followers, but because we have a sense of personal integrity. And that whatever we might gain by cutting those corners will lose in terms of that personal integrity. So if I could invite each of you to sum up your final thoughts in a minute or so. Mariah, you want to start?
I think that's where I would fall anyway, even the thought of the children and having the extra seat. I tend to rarely go against a rule because I feel that it's like you mentioned here, where if I start down that road and then maybe the next time it's a little easier and the next time it's a little easier and I'm just not comfortable with it because I know that the rules typically are in place to the benefit of society and to greater good. It's unlikely that people put rules in place to make it difficult. That's not usually why they're there. It's more to make it easier for society to function as a whole.
Well said. Catherine?
I agree with Mariah in that, you know, having to live with yourself later is how I think about it. If you start to go down that road and the gray area gets wider and wider and wider, and you begin to discuss, well, you know, it's not that bad, or it's not this, you know, or it just doesn't feel good internally. And so for me, I always talk about my word is my bond. And if I give you my word, I want you to be able to trust that I'm doing the best I can to be, you know, ethical and use my integrity to say, if I promise it, I'm doing it. And if you don't have to think twice, you don't have to have that wonder, am I going to show up? I'm going to be there. If I said I'm going to be there. And the same token that in this situation, I would, you know, look at the letter of the law. I would also, one of the things that popped into my head when we were talking about the weight of the child, I also was thinking, in an accident, what is the safest thing for my child? And is it to be in I mean, God forbid I'm in a plane crash, but you know, what is the safest thing for my child? And so that I always have to say, sometimes there's things in a rule that you don't see, but there's a rule for a reason. And following it is probably in the best interest of everyone's good health too, because child could easily slip out of your arms in that situation.
What I really like about some of your observations, Catherine, is that you're thinking outside the situation. And that's also so fundamental to ethics, is that we have to expand our view. We have to see the bigger context, and we have to use our imaginations to think not just what's in front of me, but what are the various possibilities. So thank you for that. Jeff, you got the last word.
Oh my gosh. No pressure there. No pressure. Yeah, what you're talking about it in expanding your thoughts. I feel like in this case, if I were to bend the rules or omit information, then I start down that slippery slope of making it all about me, and that is a dangerous place to go, to put myself above everything else, to assume positive intent for the rules, and to respect the rules. For me, it all comes down to my values. knowing my values gives me clear direction moving forward and helps me to make ethical choices, even when I'm tempted to not doing that. So knowing my values ahead of time so that when I'm presented with a situation like this helps me to make solid ethical decisions confidently.
And Jeff's business is called Core Authenticity. And we can see now that he is living his brand and living his values. And I think all of you are. So thank you for what I was sure would be, and I think certainly has been, a lively and thoughtful discussion. Thank you to the panelists, Mariah Edgington, Catherine Fitzgerald, and Jeff Kozitek. Did I get that right?
It's close. It's close. Hey, this should be the fierce debate that I was promising people on LinkedIn.
Pronouncing your name?
Anything. So something fierce and conflict based would be good.
Well, I hope you will join me again for another session. And for those of you who are watching or listening, if you'd like to suggest an ethical scenario or a dilemma for discussion, please go to my website, YonasonGoldson.com, and use the contact box to submit your proposal. If you are a Grappling with a Gray member, please use the community link to participate in a follow-up Q&A and continued discussion right now. And if you're not a member, please go to gwtg.live. That's gwtg.live, where you can sign up for a free 30-day trial membership and enjoy member benefits. Please join us again next week for another ethical discussion as our panel grapples with the gray.
Woo-hoo.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.